A rose for Emily. The ironwork of Oakwood's gates emitted a mournful creak as Richard forced them inward. The late autumn air, scented with decaying foliage and the tang of moist soil, nipped at his face and hands. Gloves, of course, forgotten at a typical oversight, a tiny negligence magnified, a microcosm of his failings with Emily. He walked among the headstones, their granite and marble surfaces reflecting the gloomy sky. Fallen leaves coated the path, each footfall a hollow crunch mirroring the ache in his core. A year since his world had fractured, leaving him adrift. A year since Emily vanished. Her resting place was marked by a simple granite slab, bearing her name, dates, and a solitary inscription. Beloved. He'd been incapable of articulating anything further. What words wouldn't ring false, inadequate? The ordered flowers, an opulent display of white lilies and roses, sat primly in place, a symbol of a perfection he'd always pursued, but a figure kneeling disrupted the scene. A boy, slight of frame and clad in outsized clothes, was beside the immaculate bouquet. His back was to Richard, revealing only a disheveled cap of dark hair and the subtle tremor in his narrow shoulders. A single crimson rose resided in his hand. Richard's brow furrowed. Who was this child, and what connection did he have to Emily? He approached, his polished shoes grating on the gravel. Unheard, the boy carefully laid the rose at the stone's base. "Excuse me," Richard stated, his tone edged with the authority he was used to wielding. The boy flinched, pivoting abruptly. Startlingly green eyes widened, reflecting raw apprehension, though no older than 12. His gaze held a guarded knowingness that belied his age. "Who are you?" Richard inquired, softening his voice, but the implicit demand remained. "And what brings you here?" The boy scrambled up, retreating slightly. "Just leaving a flower?" he mumbled, almost inaudibly, wringing his hands. Richard scrutinized him. The smudge of dirt on his cheek, the tattered hem of his jeans, the flimsy jacket offering scant protection from the pervasive chill. "Homeless, without a doubt." "Did you know Emily?" Richard asked. More gently now, he found himself unexpectedly captivated by this unforeseen mourner. The boy hesitated, his gaze flickering between Richard and the grave. "I saw her sometimes," he finally admitted. "Downtown. By the library." Richard's brow creased further. Emily never mentioned volunteering. She hadn't confided anything that would account for this boy's presence. A familiar pang tightened his chest, a knot of suspicion and bitterness. Had he truly known his own daughter? "What's your name?" Richard pressed. "Alex," the boy replied, barely a whisper. "Alex Reyes." "Alex," Richard repeated, testing the sound. "How did you come to know Emily?" Alex scuffed his shoes against the ground, avoiding eye contact. She was kind to me," he murmured. "She used to bring me food. And books." Richard felt a surge of something akin to guilt, or perhaps belated regret. He had been so consumed by his own bereavement, so entrenched in his work, that he'd remained oblivious to his daughter's charity. "What sort of books?" Richard inquired, suppressing the uncomfortable feeling. He craved facts, specifics. He needed to grasp the situation. "Adventure stories," Alex replied, a ghost of a smile gracing his lips. "She knew I liked pirates. She even gave me a compass once." He reached into a pocket and produced a small, time-worn compass, displaying it briefly before quickly tucking it away. Richard fixed on the compass. He recalled Emily's childhood obsession with pirates, her yearning for a compass for her 6th birthday. He'd bought her one. A cheap, plastic toy. Yet, the compass Alex held was different, older, more substantial. "Where did she get that?" Richard's tone sharpened. Alex recoiled. "I don't know," he blurted. "She just gave it to me." Richard studied the boy intently, searching for deception. He saw only fear mingled with a profound sorrow, but beneath the apprehension, he detected something else. A glint of intelligence, a resilient spark. "It's her birthday," Alex said softly, breaking the silence. "I just wanted to bring her a rose." He glanced down at the single crimson bloom at the grave, then back at Richard. "I should leave." He turned to depart, but Richard intervened. "Wait." he urged. It's cold. Let me offer you a ride. And perhaps you could tell me more about Emily. He couldn't articulate why, but he felt a desperate need to know. Tio comprehend this connection, this hidden facet of his daughter's existence. Alex hesitated, suspicion clouding his features. He resembled a trapped creature, poised to flee. Richard understood he had to proceed carefully. I just want to talk, he said, adopting the gentlest tone he could muster. That's all. Secrets at the soup kitchen. Alex shifted, his gaze flickering between Richard and the freshly turned earth. The wind, sharp and laced with the scent of damp leaves, whipped around them, tugging at his threadbare jacket. I knew her from the soup kitchen on Bleecker. St. Jude's. Richard's expression didn't change, but Alex sensed a subtle tightening around his jaw. The man was a fortress, built of expensive tailoring and cold pronouncements. Emily volunteered at a soup kitchen? Alex nodded. Every Tuesday. Like clockwork that she'd help serve. Clean up. Sometimes she'd bring clothes. Good clothes, stuff she probably didn't wear anymore. He scuffed his boot against the wet grass, a small gesture of defiance against the oppressive silence. She didn't treat us like we were invisible. Richard's eyes, the color of glacial ice, narrowed slightly. He hadn't known. Emily, his Emily, spending her Tuesdays dishing out stew to the homeless? It didn't fit the carefully curated image he held of her. The debutante, the socialite, the dutiful daughter destined for a life of privileged ease, that a life snatched away too soon. Tell me more. It wasn't a request, but a command, layered with an almost desperate curiosity. Alex hesitated. He hadn't intended to say so much. Talking about Emily felt like stirring up ashes, releasing sparks of memory that threatened to burn him again. But Richard's gaze was unwavering, a silent plea hidden beneath the stern facade. She listened. Really listened. Most people just look right through you, like you're a ghost. But she'd make eye contact, ask your name. Remember it the next week. Richard processed this in silence. Emily had always been compliant, agreeable. She echoed his opinions, deferred to his judgment. He believed he knew her inside and out. The soup kitchen. It was a jarring note in the symphony of his expectations, that a dissonance he couldn't quite reconcile. He reached into his pocket. Pulling out a slim, silver card case, he extracted a card, the embossed lettering glinting in the weak sunlight. Alex, is it? He held the card out. I appreciate you coming forward. I would like to understand Emily better. Perhaps you could help me. Alex took the card, his fingers brushing against Richard's. The man's skin was surprisingly warm, almost feverish. He glanced at the card. Richard Harding. The name meant nothing to him. I don't want your money, he mumbled, trying to hand it back. Richard's hand closed over Alex's, preventing him from retracting. It's not a bribe, Alex, it's an invitation. Allow me to offer you a ride and a meal. You look like you could use one. We can talk somewhere warmer. He released Alex's hand, the silence thick with unspoken questions. Alex considered the offer. Suspicion warred with hunger, both gnawing at his insides. He hadn't eaten anything substantial in days. And he wanted to talk about Emily. To keep her memory alive, even for a little while longer. Okay? He said finally, his voice barely a whisper. Richard nodded curtly, turning towards the gleaming black car parked a short distance away. The driver, a hulking figure in a dark suit, snapped to attention as they approached. Richard opened the rear door, gesturing for Alex to enter. The car was a world away from the streets Alex knew. The leather seats were soft and supple. The air smelled faintly of citrus. He sank into the plush upholstery, feeling a strange mix of discomfort and relief as the car pulled away from the cemetery. Richard turned to Alex, his gaze intense. So, Alex, tell me, what kind of things did Emily talk about? He paused, a flicker of something that might have been vulnerability crossing his face. Did she ever mention me? The engine hummed, a low, insistent thrum that filled the silence. Alex looked out the window, watching the city blur past, a kaleidoscope of faces and buildings that he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this meal, this conversation, was about more than just Emily. It was about Richard Harding, a man desperately trying to piece together the fragments of a life he thought he knew, a life that had been shattered beyond repair. And Alex, a homeless kid from the streets, held some of those missing pieces in the tattered pockets of his memory. The matching bracelets. She always wore this, Alex murmured, his finger etching patterns into the weathered concrete. He avoided Richard's gaze, focused instead on the phantom design he was creating. Silverish, kinda dull, right? With these little azure stones, like wee cornflowers dotted all around. Richard had been lost in the desolate panorama of the graveyard. The chill seeping deep at Alex's words reeled him back. That bracelet. Emily had cherished it. A Florentine souvenir, picked from a cluttered stall. Forget-me-nots, not cornflowers, adorned it. A detail resurfacing after all this time. He pivoted, a nascent hope flickering within. Azure stones? You're certain? Alex nodded, finally meeting Richard's stare head-on. Yeah, pretty sure. Always played with it. Said it reminded her of the sky's hue. Richard's gaze sharpened. He hadn't uttered a word about the color. He hadn't mentioned anything about the bracelet except for its existence. Let me see your hands, he stated, his voice taut. Hesitation flickered across Alex's face, replaced by wariness. He jammed his hands deep inside the cavernous pockets of his hoodie. Why? Just show me. The order admitted no debate. A glacial resolve settled over Richard, a familiar armor against the vulnerability of grief. He couldn't afford weakness. Not with this kid. Slowly, grudgingly, Alex's hands emerged, grimy, scarred. Nails gnawed to the quick, and there, on his left wrist, catching the wan light, was the bracelet, silver, patinated with age. A circlet of tiny blue gems. A jolt, visceral and jarring, shot through Richard. Impossible. Utterly impossible. Emily had been interred with that bracelet. He'd witnessed it himself. He seized Alex's wrist, his grip surprisingly fierce. Alex recoiled slightly but didn't struggle. Richard scrutinized the bracelet. His breath caught in his throat. It was a replica, and oh, it was identical, down to the minute abrasion on a single gem. Where did you acquire this? Richard demanded, his voice barely audible. Alex swallowed hard, his eyes skittering around the cemetery, seeking escape. Found it? He mumbled. Discovered it where? Richard pressed, his grip tightening. He knew he was pushing, bordering on aggression. But he was powerless to stop. Horrific, electrifying possibilities swirled within. Around. Alex prevaricated, attempting to tug his arm free. Just lying around. Richard released him, but the inner chill only deepened. He didn't believe him. Not for an instant. He fixed Alex with a stare, truly seeing him for the first time. The guarded gaze, the defensive stance, the tattered clothes obscuring, yet not entirely concealing, a sharp intellect. He was concealing something vital. He needed answers. He needed to unearth the truth. I want to continue discussing Emily, Richard said, forcing a veneer of calm, of reason. He understood his strength lay in control, in manipulating circumstances to his advantage. It's too bitter out here. Accompany me back to my residence. We can have tea, something to eat. Alex scrutinized him, suspicion vying with something else. Perhaps hunger, perhaps mere curiosity. Your residence? Richard nodded. Why is that my home? It's warmer. And I possess some images of Emily you might appreciate. A calculated falsehood. That he possessed countless images of Emily, but none he would expose to a stranger. This revolved around mastery of the situation, extracting the desired data. Alex tarried, his gaze flitting between Richard and the wrought iron gates. The inner turmoil was palpable. He was wary, but the lure of warmth, sustenance, and a connection to Emily was too potent. Finally, a nod. Okay. Richard didn't smile. Smiling felt foreign. He felt a stark resolve, a feeling of direction long absent. He guided Alex toward the waiting limousine, the crunch of gravel accompanying their steps as they departed. Richard glanced back at Emily's headstone, a solitary white rose offering a sorrowful counterpoint to the cold, hard stone. He made a pledge, unspoken but immutable. He would expose the truth, regardless of the cost. A gilded cage. The crystal chandelier in the drawing room cast a web of light across Eleanor's face, highlighting the sharp angles of her cheekbones. "Richard, this is unwise," she stated, her voice a precise, clipped tone that brooked no argument. He stood by the window, the manicured gardens stretching out beneath him like a green carpet. "Unwise?" "Eleanor, the boy knew Emily, he was there, at the cemetery. That's all I care about right now. But to bring him here into the house? To offer him carte blanche? It's reckless. We know nothing about him." Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass, the clink barely audible above the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Richard turned. His eyes, usually cold chips of ice, held a raw, almost pleading quality. "He's just a boy, Eleanor. A scared, lost boy, and he might know something about Emily, about her last days." Eleanor's expression softened infinitesimally. She understood Richard's grief, the gaping hole Emily's death had left in his life. But sentimentality was a luxury they couldn't afford. "He could be after your money, Richard, manipulating you. These street children are often far more cunning than they appear." He sighed, the sound heavy with fatigue. "I've considered that. I have security measures in place. We'll watch him. But I won't dismiss him out of hand. Not when he might hold a piece of Emily." Eleanor pursed her lips. "And what about the media? The board? They're already whispering about your erratic behavior. Bringing a street urchin into Harding Manor won't exactly quell their anxieties." Richard's jaw tightened. "Let them whisper. I built this company from nothing. I'll run it as I see fit. And right now, I need to know the truth about Emily." He walked towards the door, his movements stiff, almost mechanical. "See to it that Alex is comfortable, and discreetly, Eleanor, run a thorough background check. Everything. Every contact, every transaction. Leave no stone unturned." Later, after the house had settled into an uneasy quiet, Richard found himself standing outside the guest room where Alex slept. The oak door felt heavy beneath his hand. He hadn't felt this conflicted in years. Eleanor was right. Of course, he was being reckless, driven by grief and a desperate hope that bordered on delusion. But the image of the boy's face, streaked with dirt and haunted by shadows, wouldn't leave him. He pushed the door open a crack. The room was dimly lit by a small bedside lamp. Alex lay sprawled on the large bed, his thin frame swallowed by the plush duvet. He looked younger, more vulnerable. In sleep, Richard stepped inside. His movements silent as a shadow, he pulled a small, sterile swab from his pocket, the plastic crinkling faintly in the quiet room. He hesitated, his hand trembling slightly. This felt wrong, a violation of the trust he was supposedly extending to the boy. But the need to know, the gnawing uncertainty that had been eating him alive since Emily's death, overwhelmed his scruples. He gently brushed the swab against Alex's cheek, collecting a sample of saliva. The boy stirred slightly, mumbling something unintelligible, but didn't wake. Richard quickly sealed the swab in a small vial and slipped it back into his pocket. He backed out of the room, closing the door softly behind him as he walked down the hallway. The weight of the vial in his pocket felt heavier than any burden he had ever carried. He knew that whatever the DNA test revealed, it wouldn't bring Emily back. But perhaps, just perhaps, it would bring him some measure of peace. Or shatter the fragile remnants of his world completely. He made his way to his private study, a room he'd redesigned after Emily's death to include a state-of-the-art laboratory, capable of running any test, and unreachable by anyone but himself. The gilded cage he'd built for himself was becoming more and more isolated. The unthinkable truth. The envelope, heavier than its contents suggested, trembled between Richard's fingers. Sleep had been a stranger lately, haunted by phantom images of Emily and the boy, Alex. Finally, he'd conceded to the DNA test. A reluctant crack in the fortress of his certainty. Doubt had seeped in. He sat in his study, encircled by the silent judgment of unread, leather-bound books. The air, usually a balm of aged paper and rich wax, now felt oppressive, a suffocating shroud. A decisive rip tore open the envelope. The pristine report within seemed to mock his agitation. His gaze darted across the dense text, bypassing the technicalities until it landed on the stark pronouncement. Relationship probability. 99.99%. He scanned it again, deliberately, each word a sledgehammer against the foundations of his carefully constructed life. Alex was his grandson. Color leached from Richard's face. The room swam, the imposing bookshelves dissolving into a blurry mass. He clutched the edge of his mahogany desk, knuckles bone-white. A grandson, a boy living on the streets, foraging for survival. His own flesh and blood. He slumped into his chair, the weight of revelation crushing him. He had a second chance at family, a connection to Emily he thought irretrievably lost. Yet, the potential for joy, for warmth, was instantly eclipsed by a chilling wave of resentment. Why the secrecy? Why hadn't Emily confided in him? He conjured her image, so vibrant, so alive, a stark contrast to his own rigid reserve. He recalled their clashes, his disapproval of her artistic bent, her defiant spirit that chafed against his expectations. He'd envisioned her walking in his footsteps, inheriting his legacy. Her dreams lay in canvases and colors. She simply desired to live. He had always believed he was safeguarding her, guiding her path, but now a dreadful question arose. Had he simply smothered her spirit? Had his controlling hand driven her away and influenced her decision to conceal Alex's existence? The notion was unbearable. He squeezed his eyes shut, a sharp spike of pain piercing his temples. He recalled Emily's final day, the clinical chill of the hospital room, the unbearable burden of bereavement. He had erected barricades around his heart then, concealing his grief beneath a veneer of aloof efficiency. He'd convinced himself that numbness was preferable to enduring that agonizing pain again. Now, those defenses were collapsing. The untamed grief surged back, amplified by this fresh layer of betrayal, of squandered opportunities. He could have known Alex. He might have been a grandfather. He could have been a better father. He opened his eyes and fixed on the DNA confirmation. Alex. He pictured the boy's face, smudged with grime, the guarded eyes that reflected a spark of Emily's essence. He imagined Alex seeking refuge on the bleak streets, battling cold and hunger. A searing wave of shame engulfed him. A visceral punch to the gut. He rose, the chair screeching against the polished expanse. He needed to locate Alex. He yearned to bring him into his life. He needed to atone, not just to Alex, but to Emily, to himself. That he reached for the telephone. His hands still unsteady. He dialed, his voice a guttural rasp. Find him. He commanded, the order barely audible. Find Alex. Bring him here. Immediately. He replaced the receiver, the silence of the study pressing down once more. He moved to the window, his gaze sweeping across the manicured lawns, the rigidly symmetrical floral arrangements. Everything felt skewed, unnatural. That it all needed to be uprooted, replanted. He had a grandson, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Richard Harding discerned something beyond sorrow or animosity. It was a delicate, fragile sensation, barely a flicker, yet it burned within him hope, and coupled with it a profound anxiety that he somehow would find a way to extinguish it. Why she hid him? Richard registered the envelope's clinical whiteness, its sharp corners a stark counterpoint to his trembling. Before him stood Alex, slight form lost in an outsized hoodie, the cemetery wind gusting around them, redolent with damp soil and the ghosts of floral tributes. These, Richard's voice, gravel rough, announced, are the DNA results, confirming our connection. He scrutinized Alex, searching for a glimmer of comprehension, some indication he anticipated the revelation. The boy simply stared, expression shuttered, eyes wary. Richard ripped the paper open. The technical jargon swam before him, incontrovertible proof rendered in stark print. It's true, isn't it? He challenged, offering the document. Emily knew. She concealed it all along. Alex recoiled. As if struck, he retreated a step, gaze fixed on the ground. A murmur escaped his lips, so faint it barely registered. She did what she felt necessary. Felt necessary? Richard's composure shattered. He seized Alex's arm. A firm, not violent, grasp, forcing eye contact. Tell me, why the secrecy? Why didn't she confide in me? Alex wrenched his arm away, a flash of unexpected fury igniting his eyes. Because of you. She feared what you'd do. Richard staggered back, the words a palpable strike. Feared me? Yes, she understood you. Your need to orchestrate everything, everyone. She knew if you discovered me. Alex's voice broke. You'd have whisked me away, placed me in some gilded academy, or worse, shipped me off God knows where. Transformed me. Made me into someone I'm not. The accusation landed like a sledgehammer. He reeled. The sheer weight of it crushing him, he remembered. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Flashback. Asterisk Emily, face drained, pacing the expanse of their lavishly appointed living room. The hearth fire crackled, painting the walls with dancing light, yet her gaze was fixed, distant, beyond the expensive decor. I can't. Richard. I simply can't tell him. Asterisk. Asterisk Richard, engrossed in documents at his desk, brow furrowed in concentration. Tell whom what? Emily, I'm rather occupied if you don't mind. Asterisk. Asterisk about. A boy. One I've been supporting. Relies on me, Richard, but should you find out, you'll want to improve the situation. To manage it, to control it. Asterisk. Asterisk Richard sighed, setting the papers aside. He swiveled, his gaze piercing. What sort of boy? And why wouldn't I offer assistance? Isn't that our inclination? We help those in need. Asterisk. Asterisk Emily's voice edged higher, tinged with panic. No, Richard. You misunderstand. This isn't philanthropy. This is about him having autonomy. A genuine existence. Not one molded by your ambitions. Asterisk. Asterisk he rose, his imposing height dwarfing her. Emily, you're being cryptic. Who is this boy? Explain yourself. Asterisk. Asterisk she shook her head, tears welling. No, I refuse. He's safe, and he'll remain so, provided you remain ignorant. She turned sharply and fled, leaving Richard alone, frustration a tightening knot in his chest. Asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Richard squeezed his eyes shut, the memory a brand seared into his psyche. Another fragment surfaced. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Flashback. Asterisk Emily, muttering into her mobile phone, her back rigidly facing him. He only caught fragments, promising him the moon. But it wouldn't be his dream. He deserves more. Asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. He opened his eyes, the truth a frigid stone settling in his core. He glimpsed the anxiety in Emily's expression. Her fierce protectiveness, her concealment wasn't malicious. It stemmed from love, from apprehension of him. She believed I'd try to claim you, he murmured, his voice barely audible. Alex shifted his gaze, jaw tight. The wind keened around them, a plaintive lament mirroring Richard's despair. She was correct, wasn't she? Richard pressed, the question a bleak statement. He knew, intrinsically, that Alex wouldn't respond, and that no response was needed. He perceived it in the averted eyes, the tense posture. Alex's silence spoke volumes, echoing Emily's unspoken anxieties. He would have intervened. He would have tried to reshape him. He would have sought to refashion Alex into someone he wasn't, because that was his nature. That was the man he was, and Emily, the woman he cherished, had recognized it all along. Richard crumpled to his knees, the damning report drifting from his grasp. He felt the chill permeate his bones, a stark reminder of the solitude he had cultivated, a man possessed of immense resources. Yet he had managed to alienate the very individuals who mattered most. The consequence of his transgressions, his controlling tendencies, descended upon him, a landslide of sorrow and remorse. At long last, comprehension dawned. Emily hadn't concealed Alex from him. She had shielded him for him. To safeguard him from becoming another casualty of Richard's compulsion for domination. And in that act, she'd laid bare the devastating truth about a father's regret. Rain lashed the study window, each drop a cold accusation. Richard gazed at the blurred cityscape, gold bleeding into the downpour. The sugary dregs in his glass did little to dispel the acrid taste of Emily's rejection. I don't trust you, father. The words looped in his head, a cruel, persistent echo. He'd built a life on dependability, expecting it from his staff, wagering it on every deal struck. Yet the one person whose faith mattered above all else regarded him with suspicion. The realization hit him hard, constricting his chest, leaving him struggling for breath. He slumped into the leather chair, Its yielding surface offered no solace. Emily. Hadn't he striven to steer her, to shield her from the sharp edges of the world? Looking back, his guidance reeked of control, his protection a gilded cage. He'd stifled her spirit beneath his expectations, pruned her aspirations with his demands. He remembered her childhood spark, her laughter, a beacon that could illuminate any room. He'd admired that vitality even as he'd sought to mold it, to sculpt it into something more manageable. He desired her to be resilient, triumphant, everything he envisioned she should be, blind to the fact that she already possessed these qualities in her singular way. He squeezed his eyes shut. Emily's face, etched with disappointment and a hint of trepidation, seared his vision. He'd been so consumed with providing, with securing her future, that he'd neglected the simple act of presence. He'd been so busy constructing an empire that he'd failed to nurture a relationship. The naked truth slammed into him. As forceful as the tempest outside, he had alienated her. His overbearing tendencies, fueled by a deep-seated insecurity and a frantic urge to guard her from the suffering he knew too well, had driven a chasm between them. His love, yes, it was there, but twisted and tainted by his own imperfections, and here he sat, marooned in his lavish study, surrounded by symbols of success, yet utterly impoverished in the currency that truly mattered. Trust. He'd lost Emily's faith, and in that loss, he'd forfeited a piece of himself. He pictured Alex, the boy he had encountered by Emily's grave. A child bereft of his mother, just as Emily had been. Decades before, he'd glimpsed a spark of that same indomitable spirit in Alex's gaze, a resilience that both moved and humbled him. And he knew, with a certainty that resonated in his very core, that he could not repeat his failings. He would resist the urge to shape Alex, to govern him, to force him onto a predetermined path. He would simply be there. A steadfast presence, a bedrock of support, a safe haven in the storm. He would offer Alex the affection and stability he deserved, without strings attached. He would listen, learn, and allow him to blossom into the person he was destined to become. Richard pushed himself to his feet, resolution hardening his spine. The rain continued its relentless assault, but the darkness within him had begun to dissipate, replaced by a fragile ember of hope. Along an arduous path of self-examination and restoration lay ahead. The past remained unchangeable, but the future was his to sculpt. He approached the window, his palm resting against the icy glass. He would begin by earning back Emily's trust, painstakingly, one step at a time, and he would dedicate himself to ensuring that Alex never experienced the torment of a father's remorse. He owed them both nothing less. Backlash. The mahogany table felt cold beneath Richard's trembling hands. He hadn't expected a welcoming party, not exactly, but the sheer animosity radiating from his sister, Beatrice, and his senior partners was a palpable thing, thick enough to choke on. "Richard, you're being irrational," Beatrice hissed, her diamond earrings glinting under the chandelier light. This boy. It's absurd. Absurd. Richard's voice cracked, betraying his frayed nerves. He cleared his throat. "He's Emily's son." A collective gasp rippled around the table. Arthur Finch, the firm's oldest partner, steepled his fingers. "Richard, with all due respect, grief does strange things to a man. Have you considered a second opinion?" Richard slammed his fist on the table, rattling the crystal glasses. "I've considered that you're all vultures, circling, waiting for me to fall apart so you can pick clean what I've built." He saw the flicker of triumph in Eleanor's normally impassive eyes, and his stomach clenched. He couldn't trust any of them. "That's enough," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We're concerned about you, Richard, and about the Harding legacy." She emphasized the last two words, a clear jab. "The Harding legacy is about more than just money," Richard retorted, though even to his own ears it sounded weak, unconvincing. He hadn't thought about legacy until Emily's secret had forced him to confront the hollowness of his achievements. "Then act like it," Finch snapped. "Don't throw it all away on some street urchin who likely saw an opportunity." Richard's gaze hardened. "Alex is not an urchin. He's a survivor, and he's my grandson." He stood, the force of his conviction momentarily silencing the room. "I am setting up a foundation in Emily's name. It will be dedicated to helping underprivileged youth, giving them the opportunities she always championed." Eleanor finally spoke, her voice smooth as silk. "Richard, that's a very generous idea, but perhaps a more traditional philanthropic endeavor, a university endowment, perhaps?" Richard narrowed his eyes. He knew Eleanor's machinations intimately. "The Emily Harding Foundation will focus on at-risk youth, and Alex will be involved." He saw the outrage bloom on Beatrice's face, the thinly veiled contempt in Finch's. Eleanor's expression, however, remained unreadable. Later, in his office, the city lights twinkling below, Richard buzzed Eleanor, "Come in." She entered, notepad in hand, her efficiency a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil swirling inside him. "I've drafted a press release regarding the foundation, Mr. Harding." "Good. Have it mention Alex by name?" Eleanor paused, her pen hovering over the pad. "Are you certain that's wise, sir? It could invite scrutiny." "I am certain." He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him. "I want you to work with Alex. He has ideas. I want to hear them." Eleanor's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, sir." But Richard knew she disapproved. He knew she saw Alex as a complication, a stain on his carefully curated image. He didn't care. He was tired of playing the game, of pretending to be the unfeeling titan everyone expected him to be. He picked up the framed photo of Emily on his desk, her smile vibrant and full of life. "I'm finally doing the right thing, sweetheart," he whispered. The next morning, Alex arrived at the office, looking lost in a new, ill-fitting suit. Richard saw the flicker of anxiety in his eyes, and a wave of protectiveness washed over him. "Come on," Richard said, leading him towards the conference room. "Let's build something that matters." As they entered, Richard noticed Eleanor standing by the window, her arms crossed, watching them. Richard gave her a nod. He noticed a flicker of something he couldn't quite read in her eyes before she turned away. Despite the disapproval, the skepticism, the thinly veiled threats, Richard felt a surge of something akin to hope. He finally had a purpose, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. He would create a legacy Emily would be proud of, even if he had to fight everyone to do it. A legacy of love. The Emily Harding Foundation's temporary headquarters buzzed with the monotonous drone of fluorescent tubes, a jarring contrast to the quiet resolve etched on Alex's face. He meticulously sorted through donated garments, distinguishing infant tees from time-worn denim. His brow creased in focused concentration. From the doorway, Richard observed him, a mug of tepid coffee cooling in his grasp. He hadn't anticipated Alex's passionate commitment. His expectations were nebulous, perhaps a morose boy, begrudging his charitable obligations. Instead, he witnessed a driven young man, motivated by something beyond Richard's comprehension. "Need a hand?" Richard inquired, the question sounding stilted, even to himself. Alex glanced up, a fleeting smile illuminating his features. "I'm good, Mr. Harding. Just sorting sizes, making sure we're organized." He brandished a pair of faded dungarees. "Perfect for little Matteo. About this tall." Alex indicated a point just above his waist. "Sweetest grin. But his clothes are always." His voice trailed off, the smile fading like a dying ember. Richard was familiar with Matteo, a particularly poignant case Emily had outlined in her correspondence. A sharp, unfamiliar pang resonated in his chest. "Understood. Just holler if you need anything." He retreated to his makeshift office, a confined space overflowing with documents and partially unpacked boxes. He attempted to concentrate on the balance sheets, the endless columns demanding his attention, but his thoughts repeatedly returned to Alex, to Matteo, to Emily. He perceived her influence in Alex's dedication. His quiet capability at IT was a poignant reminder of his loss and the things he'd failed to fully value. Later, Richard accompanied Alex to a local community center, the site of the Foundation's supply distribution. The atmosphere pulsed with youthful energy, children's joyous cries reverberating through the aged corridors. Alex navigated the crowd with graceful ease, radiating genuine warmth. He knelt to greet Matteo, bestowing the overalls, his face beaming as the boy's face lit up. Richard watched, captivated, as Alex assisted a young girl in choosing a backpack, patiently detailing its various compartments and features. He noted the gratitude shining in the parents' eyes, the relief etched on their weary countenances. Richard found himself beside Maria, Matteo's mother. She was a slight, careworn woman. Her gaze softened as she looked at Alex. "He is a good boy," she murmured, emotion thickening her voice. "He remembers Emily. He helps us. Like she did." Richard's throat constricted. Words of comfort eluded him. He merely nodded, his gaze fixed on Alex, now encircled by a gaggle of children, their laughter bubbling as he performed a simple magic trick. That evening, Richard ambled along the riverbank, city lights dancing on the inky surface of the water. Emily occupied his thoughts, her boundless empathy, her unshakable faith in humanity. He considered Alex, his evident resilience, the inner strength he possessed despite his difficult circumstances. He recognized that Emily had bestowed more than just a charitable organization. She'd bequeathed a legacy of genuine caring, and Alex was its torchbearer, one compassionate deed at a time. He retrieved his phone and punched in Alex's number. "Mr. Harding." Alex responded, surprise lacing his tone. "Alex," Richard said, the name feeling oddly natural on his tongue. "I've been giving the foundation some thought. We require a proper headquarters, a tangible space to expand our reach, and more volunteers we need to amplify our efforts." A pause hung in the air. "That would be incredible, Mr. Harding. Furthermore," Richard continued, emboldened by a burgeoning sense of purpose, "I believe you should be centrally involved. Not simply as a volunteer, I want you to co-manage it with me." He heard Alex's intake of breath. "Co-manage me? Yes, you resonate with these kids. You understand their needs. You share a connection with Emily that I can never replicate. I need your insights, Alex." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unarticulated feelings. Finally, Alex spoke, his voice choked. I don't know what to say, Mr. Harding." "Simply agree, Alex. Affirm that you'll assist me in honoring Emily's memory. Say you'll help forge something enduring, something significant." "Yes," Alex whispered, the response barely audible. "Yes, I will." Richard closed his eyes, a solitary tear carving a path down his face. He wasn't simply constructing a foundation. He realized he was building a bridge, a connection to his departed daughter, a future brimming with potential. He was, at last, internalizing the lesson Emily had long strived to convey. He was beginning to grasp the transformative might of genuine connection.